Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new teen therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David. And this is part 2 of our Introduction to the Cognitive Distortion Starter Kit. And this is on the cognitive distortion overgeneralization and how to see that distortion within our negative thoughts.
That's right. Did you tell them that this is podcast number 190?
No, but you just did, so thank you.
Perfect. So I hope you enjoy it. It's on overgeneralization, incredibly important cognitive distortion. And again, we're going to show you how to smash it.
Yep.
Today we're going to work on the second distortion. This is a series of podcasts on each of the 10 cognitive distortions. And this is on overgeneralization. And when I wrote some notes for this podcast, I got all excited because it occurred to me that there's two ways you can overgeneralize. One is where you overgeneralize from some current moment to all of the future. So if you get rejected by someone you love, and most of us have had that experience growing up, you may tell yourself, this is always happening to me. I'm unlovable. Women are always rejecting me, or men are always rejecting me. I'll be alone forever. And that's overgeneralizing from this moment to all of the future. And you can also do that when you're feeling hopeless, which is so common in depression and sometimes in anxiety too. You're saying, I feel hopeless right now. I feel like my problems are insoluble, and I feel like I'm going to be feeling like this forever. And then you get to feeling hopeless. So that's one type of overgeneralization. The other type of overgeneralization, and I find these things philosophically really cool and really interesting, but also extremely practical and helpful, is when you generalize from some error that you made to yourself, to thinking, I'm a loser, I'm a failure. Many of you may have listened to the podcast on the treatment of Mark, and he was an older physician and just a wonderful fellow who I just love, and he's been coming 2 years to the Tuesday group to learn the 5 secrets of effective communication. But he was feeling very down because he couldn't develop a relationship with his older son. You remember we did
Yes.
a couple,
I was trying to see the number, but
podcast on him. Yeah, well, I can find the link actually.
Okay.
And he was saying, I'm a failure as a father because I can't form a relationship with my older son. And here's a man who's had, tremendous accomplishments. And he has flaws too, but he described for me once on a hike how he had been an OB/GYN doctor in Iran. And then when the revolution came, he had an emergency call to his hospital. And so he drove, to try to get to the hospital. And he was stopped by the Revolutionary Guard, who were teenagers with machine guns. And somehow they thought he was a spy or something. And they stood him up and they started shooting him in the legs.
Oh my God.
And he was shot 7 times in the legs.
Oh my God.
And they told him, if you fall over, we're going to kill you.
Oh my God.
And he stood there, and eventually they let him drive to his hospital. And he's had a pretty amazing and courageous life. And then he had to come to America because of the new ultra-Orthodox said that men aren't allowed to deliver babies. And that's what he did. So he had to escape with his family to the United States so he could continue his career. but he's had a great career and wonderful children. But he's saying, I'm a failure as a father. Because I can't get close to my son. That's a super overgeneralization, but to him it's real. Uh, your turn. I have many more things to say, but jump on in there.
Well, I do have a patient who was in prison for 3 years, and he's coming out. He's coming to me because he's depressed, and he's saying to himself, "I'm a scumbag." So he's generalizing both. Oh, I did this thing in the past, and my future is forever going to be affected by it. And he's also generalizing from the failures that he participated in, and generalizing to himself that he's a scumbag.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
I think he's doing both of those.
exactly. And why is it kind of irresponsible to call yourself a scumbag?
Kind of actually gives you an excuse not to do better.
Yeah, like you put you in a state of self-hypnosis, and then you continue to do bad things because oh, that's my nature. I'm a
Right,
scumbag.
right,
And that's the basis of all depression, which is a generalization from some current failure that you have to thinking you have a defective self. And he was actually saying on that podcast too that my brain is defective. There's something wrong with me. I have a defective self. And the Buddha saw that 2,500 years ago, that this was the cause of all depression. It comes from a generalization into the clouds of abstraction, rather than from real problems on the surface of the earth. We all have flaws. We've all made mistakes. We all screw up in various ways. We screwed up on the last podcast. We're having to redo it,
right,
for example. Uh, and when you look at your specific flaw, we say, okay, we screwed up on the last podcast. We didn't do it right, so we'll do it again.
right.
But when you say I'm a failure, I'm a bad human being, I'm a failure as a human being, that's what clinical depression is, and it's meaningless. It's but it's something that we do to ourselves as human beings. Uh, Now, but before we talk about how to turn this around, uh, you always have to decide if you want to turn around a distorted thought, and that's why we've been saying that the first technique you always want to use when you're challenging any kind of negative thought is positive reframing, where you say, what does this negative thought show about me that's positive and awesome? And also, what are some benefits to me in having this negative thought? And I'll give you a vignette of a young man I've been working with named Bradley. It's not his real name. And he contacted me because he would write me beautiful emails, loving the podcast, but I've been talking about rapid recovery with Team CBT, and he said, I don't know if something like Team CBT would be powerful enough to help someone like me. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, the first 20 years of my life, I had severe abuse. And he described the horrible things that he went through that ended up with him being pretty much afraid of people, which is understandable, uh, and, uh, and being pretty depressed as well, and feeling like he's somehow damaged or bad. And I think one of the horrible things about abuse is that we buy into the idea, because this person or these people are abusing me and hurting me, I must deserve it. There must be something wrong with me. I must have a defective self. And almost every abuse victim I've treated has had this thought: I'm defective, I'm bad, and when you that's just perfect overgeneralization. But when you think that way, when you label yourself like that, it just feels so awful, and you feel worthless. So then you think I must be worthless. Now, in spite of his background, he's done pretty darn well for himself. Although there's still a lot of room for improvement. He's married. He has a wonderful family, but he tells himself, because he's not making enough money, he's not a real man, and he's a bad husband, and he's a bad father, because a real man earns, much more money than what he's earning. His wife works; they are doing just fine as a family, but he beats up on himself like this. Now that's a classic overgeneralization. But let's see if Bradley wants to change, and so let's see if we can list what these overgeneralized self-critical thoughts show about Bradley that's positive and awesome, and also what are some benefits to him to beat up on himself like this, to say I'm not a worthwhile man, I'm not a real man, I'm a bad husband. What are some positives?
Well, it shows that he's willing to be accountable to his situation.
I see. Is that real?
Yeah, that's real.
Is that important?
Really important.
To be
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it shows that he has high standards.
Absolutely, he does. And is that important?
I think it's important.
And and his high standards have actually motivated him to work darn hard.
Right.
I've been working with him, and he does beautiful, tremendous work. And he work. I give him assignments and to do this or that, and he really follows through. Uh, what other benefits are there?
Well, it shows that he can be realistic about his situation. He doesn't put his head in the sand and pretend that he can't see what's out there.
Yeah, and he's willing to be realistic about the fact that he is flawed. He
Yeah.
does have defects. You have defects.
I do.
I've got
I have defects.
I've got tons of them
Yeah.
as well, and so he's willing to be realistic about that. What else do these thoughts show about him? And his depression, and his feeling of shame, and his feeling of inadequacy.
Well, he has a strong sense of right and wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And is that important?
I think so.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's awesome.
And it shows how much he loves his family.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that he wants to protect his family and take care of them.
Oh, absolutely. Is that a positive?
Really positive.
That's a beautiful thing. What else does it show about him? I'll add one.
Okay, you add one.
Well, the sadness and depression he feels, wouldn't that be appropriate if you'd have 20 years of horrific abuse?
Yes, that would be.
So
It's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we can add to this list, but we're going to show how to talk back to the overgeneralization.
Mm-hmm.
But when I make a list like this, then I say to him, Bradley, maybe this isn't something we should be working on. You see, to honor the resistance. And then he says, no, I really want to work on it. I'm tired of suffering like this. So then we use techniques like, let's be specific, let's define terms, examine the evidence, to pull Bradley out of the clouds of abstraction and into reality, and also the acceptance paradox. We should do this with him sometime, because he actually volunteered to record something that we could use.
Okay.
Because he's really good at it. We won't be as good at it, but we'll do it. And why don't you be the negative Bradley? I'll be the positive Bradley.
Okay.
And this is called externalization of voices. And Rhonda, as the negative Bradley, will use the second person you, and I'll be the positive Bradley and speak in the first person I.
Okay.
So you can say things like you're a bad husband, you're a failure as a man, and things like that. And I'll show you how we combat those thoughts using let's be specific, acceptance paradox, examine the evidence, things like that.
Okay. Bradley, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're not a real man because you don't make much money.
Well, that's true. My web business kind of fell through. I was doing pretty well in my web business, but then because of the change in the Google search criteria, I can't get traffic to my website anymore. And so I was making up to, $50,000-$75,000 a year, and now, it barely brings in anything. So I have a new job that I've taken on where I'm not earning much money. I just handle complaints on the telephone for a company that sells on the internet, and people, or they have questions about the products, and I'm only making $10 an hour at that. But I'm really proud of myself, and it's giving me good experience dealing with difficult people, because I've had extreme social anxiety So yes, I accept the fact that my current job, I'm not making much money, but I'm growing and learning, and I hope to earn more money in the future. Is that all you meant when you said I wasn't a real man?
Yes. Well, yes, for that negative thought.
Yeah. Okay. So who won?
I think you won.
Big or small?
Big.
Big or huge?
Huge.
Huge. And then we do a role reversal. I'll be the negative Bradley, and you be the positive Bradley.
Okay.
Um, and Could I talk to you for a minute, Bradley?
Okay.
I just want to let you know that you're not a real man.
Wow. Well,
In fact, I'll make it different. You're a bad husband.
you know what? There are times when I am a bad husband. That's true.
Do a role reversal. Turn it around.
Okay, well, I haven't finished, but I will do a role reversal.
Okay.
Sorry, Bradley, but I'm sad to tell you that you're a bad husband.
Could you tell, I'm not that bright either, so I don't know quite what you mean. Can you tell me what time of day today I was a bad husband, or what you mean when you say I'm a bad husband? I don't quite understand what you mean.
Yeah, I mean that good husbands support their families, and right now you're kind of barely supporting your family.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. My wife has such low standards. She's damn proud of me for taking this job, but I'm really proud of myself too,
Oh,
because I'm learning and growing. But I accept the fact that I'm not earning nearly as much as I'd like. Is that all you meant when you said I was a bad husband?
yep, that's all I meant.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll plead guilty as accused.
Okay, good.
Who won?
You won.
Big or small?
Big.
Big or huge?
Huge.
And how did I win huge?
Because that was a cloud of abstraction. You're a bad husband. So you got me to be really specific about what exactly that I meant. And then then you found acceptance in that and you worked to defeat it.
Yeah, and that's how you defeat an overgeneralization. We had a fellow on the hike, someone who used to be in the Tuesday group, and he came on a hike and he was in tears, and he said that he was a bad father. And I said, well, tell me about that. That's typical overgeneralization. And what happened? And well, he explained that he and his wife, they do okay financially. They're not super wealthy, but they have two sons, and so they've really sacrificed to put their sons in very fine private schools. And on vacations, they take them to places that they'll find fun, but also educationally interesting. So they've really worked hard to do great parenting for their sons. But he said that he was getting irritated with his sons because they weren't helping out around the house and they were sloughing off and not doing their part with taking out the trash or doing the dishes or whatever. And he got mad at them and he kind of flew off the handle and shouted at them. And so he was telling himself, therefore, I'm a bad father. And it was so painful to him, and he was in tears. And so again, I used kind of like examine the evidence, or let's be specific. And I said, well, so that's certainly uh, undesirable to shout at your kids. We've probably all done it at
I definitely
times,
have. Yep.
or often, or occasionally. But tell me, do you also do good things for your sons? And he says, oh, yes, we put them in the best of schools. I spend time with them every day. We take them on wonderful vacations. And I said, oh, I see. So do those good things then make you a good father? He says, I guess so. So I said, so it sounds like you're a good father and a bad father at the same time. And then it hit him like enlightenment, and he started laughing. And he saw there's no such thing as a good father or a bad father. There's just fathers, and we all make mistakes, and we all do good stuff. And here was a specific error that he'd made. And he said, I could talk it over with my sons and tell them I felt guilty and ashamed for shouting at them and that I love them like crazy, but that I get ticked off at them because sometimes they don't seem to do their part, and that his mom and I want them to do their part as well. And then he went and talked to them, and he came back the next week for the hike, and he was just on a total high because he'd had one of the most beautiful conversations with his sons. But I guess I like to keep things simple, and that if you're depressed and you're writing down your negative thoughts, and you spot an overgeneralization. And I've done this myself. I remember I got criticized by Beck once, and I started thinking I was a bad human being and I was a worthless therapist. And those thoughts seemed so real at the time because I felt so guilty and ashamed. So I feel like a bad person. I must be one. But those are just overgeneralizations. And if you find yourself doing that, there are several powerful techniques. Let's be specific. And that's a Buddhist technique. It's 2,500 years old. Look at what is the real mistake that you made, and then see if you can bring to that the spirit of acceptance, to accept the real error. I make real errors all the time. And sometimes as a physician, they result in death. When I was an intern at Island Hospital, I was so insecure, and I was assigned to this resident who had been in Vietnam doing medical work. So he was like experienced. I thought, oh man, I'm in good hands now. And the first day, we had what was called death rounds. And
Wow.
that's when a patient dies, everyone gets together and they find out who made the error that caused the patient's death. And it was him. And so but it wasn't a blaming thing. They just said this patient had some kind of non-ketotic hyperosmolar coma, and he ordered treated it the wrong way, and so the patient had a swelling of the brain and died.
Oh my goodness.
It was sad, but the patient was like this woman in her 90s or something. So I mean, she maybe wouldn't have lived too much longer. But no one was calling him a bad doctor or a bad human being. And we all just spelled out, here's the error, and we'll try to remember how not to make this error. And to tell you the truth, he was one of the greatest people I ever worked with. It was just such a pleasure doing medical work with him. He was just so kindly and so skillful.
So can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
So Bradley, who's before before you did the work with him, if you had first done, let's define the terms with him about thinking I'm a bad father, how would you do that technique? So because all human beings are...
Well, I wouldn't do let's define terms first. I would make sure we do positive reframing.
Right. So let's say you've done positive reframing.
So yeah. And then I would say to him, well, what's the definition of a bad father? And then he would say something like, it's a father who doesn't make enough money, because he's always totally loving to his daughter. And if you ask his daughter, she'd say, oh, I've got the best father in the world. But so he would say a bad father is one who doesn't make enough money. And then we could say next, okay, well, how much money do you have to make annually to be a good father? I ask him, and he'll say something like, well, $75,000. And then I'll say something like, what percentage of human beings on the surface of the earth make less than $75,000 a year? And then he'll have to say something like, probably 5 billion people.
Right.
And so you're saying they're all bad fathers, they're all bad human beings. And then he suddenly sees the nonsense. Like, however you define a bad father, you can show that the definition, or a bad human being, the definition applies to all human beings, or no human beings, or it doesn't apply to you, or it's meaningless.
Right.
When you try to, and it's the same if you try to define a worthwhile human being. There are no worthwhile human beings. It's a nonsensical concept, although some listeners might get mad at me for saying that. But worthwhile activities exist. But being good at something doesn't make you a worthwhile human being. Like, what's the definition of a worthwhile human being?
Well, you're saying there is no such thing as a worthwhile human being. There's just worthwhile activities that human beings engage in.
That's right. That's right. But if you try to define worthwhile or worthless human being, you can't define either one. What's a worthless human being? Well, someone who screws up. Well, how many things do you have to screw up at? 1, 2, 3? Well, we all screw up at many things every day. So you're saying we're all worthless human beings? See, there's no such thing as a worthless human being. There's no such thing as a worthwhile human being. And in team CBT, as well as cognitive therapy, we're not trying to get people to discover they're worthwhile. After all, we're trying to get them to take these concepts of worthwhile or worthless and flush them down the toilet and focus on living. You can say, well, David, here's how you could become a much more effective podcast host or whatever you are. And then I could try to learn and improve what I'm doing, but that wouldn't make me more worthwhile as a human being. We can illustrate this another way, but is this useful, what we're
Yes,
talking
very
about?
useful.
Yeah. And suppose you were a worthwhile human being, what good would it do you? Let's imagine that the editors of Reader's Digest get together and say, we've studied all the people on the surface of the earth, and we've determined that you have a worthwhileness rating of, 93%, and here's your certificate.
Right.
You're especially worthwhile. Well, what are you going to do with that?
I probably would just put it in a file drawer somewhere.
Yeah, or you could go to Starbucks and say, hey, I've got a rating of 93 on worthwhileness. How about a little discount?
A cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Right, because it wouldn't affect me. I'd still go through my day, and there are times I'd feel good about what I've done, and at times I'd feel like, oh my gosh, why did I do that?
See, feeling like a worthwhile human being is almost as horrible as feeling like a worthless human being. Let's imagine that we're meeting at a party. Okay. Hey, Rhonda, glad to meet you.
Oh, good to meet you too.
Yeah. I'm David.
David, I'm Rhonda.
Yeah, I'm an especially worthwhile human being.
Oh, really? How is that?
I'm just superior to most people.
Oh, gee, that's kind of off-putting. I mean,
I'm hot. I'm awesome. I'm better than almost everybody. It's just silly. But when you're depressed, you don't think that you're involved in that kind of value system where you can rate human beings. I could be really good at tennis. Would that make me a really good human being?
No, it would mean you're good at tennis.
Yeah.
Well, we all have read people in the news who one assumes could be worthwhile, like they're a good football player, or they're good at one particular thing, tennis, or maybe they're a singer, or maybe they're a writer, who have now they're in the news because they've done something that maybe other people would judge, or they themselves judge, or we would judge as a negative thing for them to do.
Yeah. But as humans, we're really superstitious, and we think that superior human beings can and do exist. And we want to find them and worship them as religious heroes,
or that they can't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and we kind of idolize these people because it's exciting to think about people in that way. But people who are truly spiritual, who are true spiritual teachers, if such a thing exists, are generally humble. They're not saying they're more worthwhile or judging others as less worthwhile.
Right, they would probably reject that if people thought they were worthwhile, they would reject that, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah. Well, anyway.
Well, this was a good one. Way better.
Good, thank you.
Shall we end with some endorsements?
Oh yeah, we didn't start with endorsements?
No, we didn't.
Oh, okay, great.
So this is a short one. It says, David Burns, I purchased every single one of your books and read them all. Without them, I wouldn't be alive today. Thanks for your contribution to the mental health field. I can't wait for your new book. And
Thank you.
Yeah,
What's
this is
that
unsigned.
person's first name? No signature, huh?
No signature on that one.
Okay, wow.
But here's another one who wrote us about episode 160, which we published September 30th of 2019, and that was the one on music where Brandon and Heather sang.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, hi, Brandon and Heather. This is from Victoria, who's a psychologist in Mexico City. And she said, hi, Brandon and Heather. I just had the chance to listen to the podcast. Congratulations, you're a great duet. The voices are beautiful. I really learned again new things. This is a very hard moment for me personally, and listening to the podcast helped me a lot. Rhonda, you're such a sweet host. David, thanks for doing the podcast. They're an amazing way to learn. Best regards to all of you. Victoria.
That's so kind, and thank you all of you who write in great questions for our Ask David podcast and beautiful endorsements. We appreciate it a lot. One thing that you can do to help us is to tell your friends and family members about the Feeling Good podcasts. This is how we grow our audience. As of today, the day we recorded this podcast, we're probably going to have, I can't guarantee it, but my projection for this month, we recorded this in October 2019, and this month will probably exceed 100,000 downloads for the first time. So we start out with just a few hundred a month, and now we're up to 100,000.
Wow.
And we want you to please continue helping us in that way, because you're our main source of marketing. And also, I'll put this in the show notes, but there's a link on my website, feelinggood.com. And then if you go there, you'll see the Feeling Good podcast. If you click on it, there's something called the list of Feeling Good podcasts. And if you send that link, if let's say you have a church mailing list or a synagogue mailing list or a temple mailing list or whatever it is, or maybe a group of educational people or just a neighborhood watch, send that link to the list of Feeling Good podcasts, because on any given day, 30% of the people in the world are depressed or anxious. And so this is something they can do for free, and we'll appreciate knowing about it, and can help them develop greater confidence and self-esteem, and that will help us a lot. Somebody did that this month, and our downloads went up 300-400% in a single day. And so we really appreciate getting that kind of help. Also, if you're a mental health professional and you need continuing education credits or good personal training, you'll find a lot of workshops on my website also. Again, it's www.feelinggood, that's one word with two G's in the middle, feelinggood.com. And then you'll find the tab for the workshops. And we've got one-day workshops you can join online from anywhere in the world. And then I've got my 4-day intensives coming up this summer. I'm going to be doing another one in Canada, in Edmonton, plus one in San Francisco. Those will be in July and August. I'll be at this mind-blowing Evolution of Psychotherapy conference in December. I don't know what I'll present on yet, but I'll be presenting on one or several things there. So thank you all for listening.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, David, for creating these great techniques.
Yeah. And next week, we're going to talk about mental filter and discounting the positive. Those are the next two distortions on the list of cognitive distortions.
Great. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.